Europe, and according to reports, US President Donald Trump will speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Monday. The call follows stalled ceasefire talks in Turkey, during which Russia demanded that Ukraine withdraw troops from occupied regions. Zelensky said he discussed stronger sanctions with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. The measures could target Russia's shadow fleet and energy sector. Here is what Volodymyr Zelensky and Mark Carney have said.
And of course, unconditional ceasefire is very. That's why we need to pressure on him, more pressure, more sanctions. We are thankful to your packages of sanctions and the European leaders, and of course, the United States of America. And I want to discuss it, and your presidency in G7.
Yes.
All these things are very, very important. So happy to see you.
Welcome. Welcome to this corner of Canada. And may I say, in every corner of Canada is Ukraine. The Canadian people stand in steadfast and unwavering support of your leadership, of the people of Ukraine. We admire what you're doing. We admire your commitment to peace, as you've demonstrated again this week. And we underscore that there can be no peace without the full support and participation of Ukraine, and that you have our.
Meanwhile, Germany and Italy say Europe is still far from deploying troops in Ukraine. Their focus remains on securing a ceasefire. This comes as German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, speaking in Rome, vowed that the EU will increase pressure on Moscow. He called Russia's refusal to agree to a ceasefire deeply disappointing. Let's listen in.
Die gestrigen Gespräche in Istanbul sind hinter unseren Erwartungen zurückgeblieben, trotz einer maximal konstruktiven Haltung der ukrainischen Verhandlungsführung. Immerhin, die Delegationen konnten einen Gefangenenaustausch verabreden, aber Russland hat sich der Forderung nach einem umfassenden und bedingungslosen Waffenstillstand bisher verweigert. Präsident Putin selbst war nicht bereit, in die Türkei zu kommen. Seine Truppen setzen auch heute die Angriffe mit unverminderter Härte.
Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has spoken to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, where he emphasized Trump's call for an immediate ceasefire. Rubio repeated that position in interviews, saying Washington supports any step towards ending the violence. Rubio also says the US welcomes Vatican's involvement in Ukraine talks and will review progress and next steps. Let's listen in to Marco Rubio.
Yes, and we thank the Holy See for its willingness to be involved in this process. Obviously, there are a number of countries that have offered that as well, but we think it would be, we'll talk about that, the status of the talks, the updates after yesterday, and the path forward.
Well, joining us to discuss these latest developments in the ongoing impasse in the Russia-Ukraine war is Ross Feingold, a political risk analyst joining us from Taipei. Ross, as always, thank you very much for being here. Let's first look at this statement from Donald Trump. How significant would a phone call be with both the leaders of Russia and Ukraine as, of course, the US works to help broker a peace deal?
We can only hope that something positive comes out of these phone calls. The events of the last few days really illustrate how difficult it is to bring about a ceasefire. Russia doesn't seem interested. They sent a lower-level delegation to the talks in Turkey that the global community and certainly Ukraine had hoped for a higher level of representation from the Russian side, and the Russians just didn't want to do it, or specifically, President Putin just didn't want to do it. I think we need to give President Trump and the United States government some credit. They're trying to bring the sides to a ceasefire. Of course, the Western European countries are also supportive of a ceasefire as well, while also maintaining their unity in supporting Ukraine, which is certainly good from the perspective of Ukraine President Zelensky.
Yes, Ross, we've heard European leaders say that talks around troops being put into Ukraine are not started yet and are some way away from happening. Do you think that this is a move potentially to bring Putin closer to agreeing to a ceasefire? We know peacekeeping troops is a big no-no for him in terms of his wishes for a ceasefire.
It's really hard to say. I mean, most notably, we've had this change in leadership in Germany. So some of these talks are really starting over again about what level of commitment to troops on the ground the Western European countries, and specifically the larger military powers like Germany and France, UK, Italy, and then smaller countries like Belgium and the Netherlands that have also been very supportive of Ukraine. It really remains to be seen how unified they are on that point and what level of support in terms of troops as well as supplies, equipment, et cetera, that they're willing to provide. So it could be that they're just not ready to have that conversation yet. It might not necessarily be part of a strategy with regard to Putin or encouraging Putin to come to talks. It does seem, based on so much discussion or talk about this issue, that at some point the Europeans might be willing to put troops on the ground, but clearly they're not there yet, and they might even be quite far away from reaching a consensus on that.
Yes, Ross, as we bring this discussion to a close, I do want to look forward. Of course, we had progress with those first direct talks between Russia and Ukraine for over 3 years, but given that they lasted less than a couple of hours, there is, of course, scepticism amongst Western leaders and other experts as well around the progress that's being made. What do you think comes next?
The interesting thing there is to see whether or not the sides will try again. As I mentioned, Ukraine had hopes for a higher level of representation from the Russian side, and the Russians declined to do that. Zelensky was open to meeting directly with President Putin as well, and the Russians declined to do that. So the thing to watch is whether or not there's going to be another bilateral negotiating session. What would the level of representation be, and when will that happen? So we should definitely be watching for that.
We will be watching for that and bring you all of those updates if it takes place. Of course, Ross is staying with us as we move on now, and Israel's military offensive in Gaza continues to escalate, with at least